Good afternoon, everyone. Erik Potzmann, Senior Consultant, will be presenting on Active Directory Security, Privileged Identity Protections. Just a few reminders. We have a chat window open for any questions. We will go through Q&A at the end of the presentation. You came in on mute, so please stay on mute. And then we will send a link to the recording following this webinar for reference. And Potzmann, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Hi. Welcome, everybody. Just a little bit about myself. I've got almost 20 years of higher ed IT experience. I mainly focus on Active Directory, Exchange, Office 365, IAM, or Identity and Access Management, and security. Today, I want to talk to you about some lessons learned in dealing with ransomware as it pertains to privileged identities in Active Directory. Everything I will talk about today has come out of real-world experience in remediating the attack vectors that threat actors have used to exploit higher education environments. All right, protecting yourself from ransomware. If the numbers are correct, you should know someone affected by malware, or maybe even have been affected by yourself. According to a poll of IT professionals by Sophos, 44% of educational institutions suffered ransomware attacks in 2020, and 58% of those hit by ransomware said that the attackers had successfully encrypted their data. Furthermore, the survey found out that the average recovery cost for organizations in the sector, considering everything from downtime to ransomware demands, came out to more than 2.7 million. That's the average per incident, which was 48% higher than the average in other industries. Additionally, more than one institution has had to close operations because of a cyber attack like this. The most recent example of that was Lincoln College, who closed operations in May of 2022 following a cyber attack December of 2021. After helping several institutions clean up and recover from these attacks recently, one thing has become clear to me. Active Directory and privileged identities need more protection. Fortunately for us, there are ways to mitigate these threats. So security principles. Hope that everyone here has heard the term zero trust, or maybe even know a bit about what it means. For me, zero trust is just a way to describe all of the security policies, procedures, and practices we already knew we should be doing in our environments. Zero trust revolves around the concept that nothing should be implicitly trusted and that everything should be continually authenticated, authorized, and verified. Privileged identities represent the single largest risk for any organization. In 2018 report by Forrester Research, they estimated that 80% of breaches have a connection to a compromised privileged credential, such as passwords, tokens, keys, and certificates. All of the recent cyber attacks that I've assisted with have seen one or more privileged identities compromised. These compromised accounts were the source of the most damaging actions taken by threat actors. Hot topic among our customers has been cybersecurity insurance audit, and there have been some surprising items within those audits. We're now seeing cybersecurity insurance driving some pretty big security initiatives. By helping our customers navigate these audits, we're being told that, you need to implement MFA everywhere for everyone, and that another example of things is detailed incident response plans. All right, so what does a breach look like? And what is lateral movement? As you can see on the screen, this is basically how lateral movement works. It's a very common way that threat actors use to gain increased access and permissions once they've gained a foothold in any environment. Lateral movement works this way. Attacker gains access to a system and evaluates where they can go and what else they can gain access to. Often this is due to compromising credentials that have been stored or previously used on the compromised system. They'll use this attack again and again until they get a domain administrator or enterprise administrator credentials, which then give them total access to your domain, your data, and any resources. So there's several ways to prevent lateral movement in an environment. Some of these revolve around making sure that your administrative accounts are separated and segmented as much as possible. Others place restrictions on what these accounts are allowed to do. Prevention techniques that I'm describing today are focused on tools that are already available to you in Active Directory. There won't be any extra software costs, just mainly a change in how your privileged identities are used and what they can do. There are third-party tools that you can purchase to do a lot of these things that may be a little bit easier to set up, but I wanted to focus in on the things that you can do right now without having to purchase anything else. All right. In my experience, the protected users group in Active Directory is not well understood or used. This group was introduced with Windows Server 2012 R2 and was designed to combat this exact type of lateral movement attack. Another often forgotten account protection is restricted delegation. This protection is intended to stop privileged access using delegated actions on behalf of the user. Sometimes we do choose ease of use over security. Threat actors love to exploit this tendency for their benefit. Privileged identities to prevent your privileged identities from becoming a liability means that we need to separate and segment the access and permissions that it grants. Also, remember that service accounts are privileged identities too, and they're usually not as well monitored or even set up sometimes. So we need to work on limiting their access as well. We often see a handful of passwords used for the local administrator accounts. This is a huge source of lateral movement and one that threat actors love to exploit. RDP is another source of risk for lateral movement techniques, and I often see very lax security policies or even no security policies around RDP. So let's talk about the protected users group. Once an account is placed into this group, there are several protections that are enabled. These protections can be enabled each separately, but this group gives you an easy way to turn them all on. One of the protections that is given is password caching for these accounts is disabled. So Windows Credential Manager and CredSSP will no longer store the password or hash on any computer. This means that offline sign-in is or unlock is not available, and you'll have to have an active connection to a domain controller. Delegated access is the ability of an application or service to do something on your behalf. The main issue with delegation is that you need to trust your services and applications to always do the right thing. Malicious actors can instead force the application to do the wrong thing. These accounts are prevented from delegated access when put in the protected users group. There are other Kerberos changes and settings that these accounts are enabled as well. So the maximum ticket life is 4 hours and there's no automatic refresh. Additionally, DES and RC4 encryption is forbidden and AES encryption is enforced. These protections pose some strict requirements, and you should really test to make sure that they are what you're looking for before getting it rolled out, or at least how to overcome any of the issues that it may present. Again, one of the big things is that this group is meant for user accounts only and should not be used for service or computer accounts. Delegated access restriction is enabled by the protected user groups, is also available to any accounts that can't have the other restrictions that the group enables. There's the user account control or UAC flag that's available to protect them. This is presented as an option in the Accounts tab in Active Directory Users and Computers that reads, "Account is sensitive and cannot be delegated." This setting should also be tested for potential issues. Since this is only a portion of the restrictions placed on the accounts in the protected users, it can be applied to service accounts. But again, testing is required to make sure that your services don't need that delegated access. This is another big one here. These lateral movements are so effective is that the domain admin is typically overused because of how it simplifies administrative duties. Domain admins are given broad powers, access, and permissions, and it's the one group you can assign somebody, and it will guarantee that they can do whatever it is that they're trying to do. Again, the ease of use over the security of the environment. This is also why it's a target for exploits. How many of you have logged into a workstation with your domain admin credentials? I know the answer is probably everyone. Those cached credentials could be harvested for lateral movement by pass the hash or offline cracking techniques. That's the lateral movement part. To prevent all of this access and permission from becoming a liability means we need to separate and segment the access and permissions we use it for. So we want to separate out these privileges into basically 3 new categories, or you could go even further with it. You want to separate your desktop administration, your server administration, and your domain administration. Domain admins should only be logging into domain controllers and maybe 1 or more selected workstations to make domain level changes only. So remove domain admins from your local administrators by GPO for everything else. Keep in mind that your domain admin credentials are probably cached all over your environment at this point. So a fresh set of credentials, or at least even a password refresh, should be done for your domain admins. Server administration should also be separated out to a new account. In the same way you remove local admin or domain admins from other computers, you can use a GPO to add these accounts to your servers for local administration. You can even separate this out further by creating access groups and separate logins for logical groupings of servers based on applications or anything else. Same principle applies to workstations. And again, you can separate it out further by local groupings of your workstations. Service accounts also have the same risk of exploit as user accounts, but the solutions are slightly different. The first major difference is that the service accounts rarely need full domain admin access. Services and applications that use these accounts should be reviewed for a minimum set of permissions needed to function. A lot of times we just see, again, because it's easy, put it in domain admins. Vendors are getting much better at giving you the least permission setup as well. So for your safety and security of the environment, make sure those least permissions are enabled. If the application supports a group managed service account, consider using one. The security of these accounts is so much greater than a regular user account. Oops. In addition, we can apply logon restrictions to service accounts, so consider that. You can identify specific computers that these accounts need access to and only allow login to those computers. This is, again, part of the Accounts tab in Active Directory Users and Computers. Lastly, make sure to regularly review your audit logs for your service accounts, domain, any privileged access. If you don't have a SIEM or log aggregation tool, you can still perform regular audits. It's just the chance of missing something is a little bit greater. However, you can change all the settings on your logs to allow them to go a little bit longer. LAPS, or the Local Administrator Password Solution. All computers, even servers, should not share a local administrator password because that allows easy lateral movement once an attacker gains a foothold in the environment. Local administrator account password used to be set by GPO. However, anyone or everyone can read passwords that are in GPO, even if they're encrypted. Microsoft realized that this was a problem and released the LAPS tool to remediate the security issue. It's been a Microsoft best practice solution for years, but still we see lots of environments without it. LAPS is generally deployed in two parts. First, by extending the Active Directory schema, and then deploying a small program to all machines. Password is then stored in a protected attribute in Active Directory, and it can only be read by specifically enumerated users and groups, and is rotated on a regular basis. This assures that no two computers have the same password for the local administrator account, and that lateral movement via this method is nearly impossible. Retrieval of the password is pretty easy. It uses the same program that's installed to store the password. You just simply run the program, select your computer, and then you read the password if you have the permissions to it. By default, all administrators can log into remote desktop. This leads to multiple accounts having access to RDP, and you should definitely limit the remote access to only accounts that need it. Also, the local administrator account is there by default. So when that account is used to RDP into the machine, you lose the ability to audit who's actually performing any actions because all you see is local administrator. And typically, many people have access to that password. You can override the local security policy with group policy settings that enumerates the specific accounts that require RDP and then remove everyone else. So where do you go next? And what are some of the advanced solutions to up your game? In here, we have the alphabet soups of next steps. MFA, multi-factor authentication. I'm sure everybody's heard about it. You're probably thinking about implementing it, at least in some form. But consider a solution that brings MFA to your on-premise Active Directory. As far as I know, there are no free tools or Microsoft tool that brings MFA to Active Directory, but there are a lot of options out there. PIM and PAM. PIM stands for Privileged Identity Management, and PAM is Privileged Access Management. They're fairly similar, it just depends on which vendor uses which term. These are generally services that allow just-in-time access with approval workflows and auditing. Privileged users check out their access and for only the time that they need it. It's a pretty nice solution. SIEM, or Security Event Information Monitoring. It's a tool that you can use to bring all the security events from across your environment to one place so that you can effectively monitor and respond to those events. EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response. This is the next evolution of antivirus software, and it goes beyond just scanning files, folders, and drives. The solution features vary by vendor, but typically it also adds behavioral and activity monitors and can integrate with other sources instead of just being an island unto itself. So a lot of times it will integrate into your email or your Active Directory to kind of see a more holistic view of threats in your environment. So at this point, we can open the floor for Q&A. I know that there's a lot of information to digest, but feel free to ask any questions and I'll do my best to respond.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so please feel free to come off mute if you have any questions. All right, we have a question, Eric. Will you give an example of a lateral movement attack and how these protections would have prevented that?
All right. So one of the situations that we had dealt with, the initial incursion was through a log4j vulnerability on a single sign-on server. And as you can imagine, if it's a single sign-on server, it has lots of permissions. So what they did is they harvested credentials for the service account that was running that, and then used that to, again, reach out and grab onto a domain admin for a user. There's a reason why they picked a user rather than using the service account. Once they had that domain admin access, they were able to get onto the domain controllers, and then they were able to deploy the ransomware directly from the domain controller throughout the environment. So my protections wouldn't prevent the initial incursion, but they could have prevented the lateral movement that ultimately led to the ransomware being, pushed out to the rest of the environment. The service account should have never had full domain admin access. It doesn't need it. You can basically set it up for something like a single sign-on to have access to only the accounts and the password reset for unprivileged accounts. Keep it separated from your privileged accounts. And again, the server admin was a domain admin. So if you'd have separated out the server admin credentials, they would not have had the domain admin access. And again, if they'd have been in, that domain user had been in the protected users group, they would have not been able to get that, because it would have been there would have been no password to use that was cached for a pass the hash attack. And then lastly, if you're using a SIEM tool or watching your logs, you'd notice that there was some very suspicious activity that's going on in your environment using a service account or even a domain admin account.
All right, thanks, Eric. One more question. Please provide the names of a couple of companies that have products that provide MFA for AD.
There, like I said, there's a lot of them. I know Duo is one, Okta is another. Those are, fairly well known. Another one that you can use, Beyond Trust, also offers that as well. They also have a PIM solution that goes along with it. There's several others out there. I think a lower cost option could be, I think Manage Engine has something for MFA as well. That's a bit lower cost, which you might want to look at. But those are some of them that are out there.
Any last questions? Okay, I think we're good to move on. For what's coming up on our webinar series or any previous webinars we've done, please visit our What's Happening page on our Ferrilli.com website, and you'll see any of the upcoming webinars that we will have in our webinar series. For any other information on pricing or additional solutions we can provide, please reach out to info@ferrilli.com, or if you have direct contact to your account manager, please reach out to them. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. If you have any other last-minute questions, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks for coming.